Ismaeel Malik was born in the United States to a family of Pakistani extraction. In his yacht, he moved to Saudi Arabia with his family, and today he is a student at al-Qura University in Mecca. During the Ramadan, he services as the Imam of Al-Nur Mosque in Reykjavik, Iceland. Okay, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask, are we going to have a Q&A session? Should I include that inside?
Excuse me?
Questions and answers, should I include them?
We don't have questions.
Oh, you don't have questions? Shalom, everybody. I would like to start with a recitation from a verse from the Quran before I get into my talk for today. So if you can join me. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين صدق الله العظيم. Before I actually start about my own personal experiences as an Imam in Iceland or as American in Iceland, which is an adventure in and of itself, I would like to shortly talk about what is an Imam. A lot of people are confused when I say Imam or when I tell them that I am a part-time Imam in Ramadan. They don't understand exactly what that entails. So if I could begin with a small story. The most perplexing question that has ever been asked to me, and it's a very simple question, was a question by the American ambassador to Iceland, Luis Arriaga. He was born in Guatemala, actually. But so Luis Arriaga asked me this very interesting question when I was invited for dinner at his house. And I was 20 years old when I first went to Iceland. So that was 3 years ago, and I was 20 years old. He asked, how did you become an Imam? How does one become an Imam? And he was very shocked at my age, commenting that I was the same age as his son. First of all, whenever I meet people, they think I'm 30, or I'm in my 30s. I don't know, it could be the beard, it could be the thobe. Something gives off a vibe that I'm in my 30s, and I'm not. I'm actually 23. So when he asked this question, it's a very simple question. How do you become an Imam, and you're only 20 years old? And what are the steps you have to do to become an Imam? Unfortunately, at that time, I wasn't prepared to answer that question. But now I am prepared to answer that question. As we know, there's 6 books of ahadith. Hadiths are the compilations of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May God's peace be upon him. And those 6 books are known as Bukhari, Muslim, Sunnah Abi Dawood, Ibn Majah, At-Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i. In 5 of these 6 books, a hadith was mentioned about who is supposed to lead prayers when it is time to pray. And we can basically come up with 5 points or 5 circumstances, 5 rules that allow a person or that give preference to one person to lead over everyone else. The 3 to 5 conditions are, number 1, al-Aqra li kitabillah, the one who can recite the book of God the best. The second one was al-A'lam bis sunnah. The third is al-Asbaq ila al-Hijrah. And the fourth is al-Asbaq ila al-Islam. And the fifth is al-Akbaru sinnan. So we'll go into more detail about that shortly. Obviously, it's in Arabic. The first point I want to talk about is يَأُمُّ الْقَوْمِ أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ. And this was found in each of the 5 versions of the hadith. In each of the 5 books that I read. It could also be in many other books. But for the purpose of this lecture, I did the research. I found it in 5 of the major 6 books. يَأُمُّ الْقَوْمَ أَقْرَأُهُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ. The people should be led by the one who is most well-versed in recitation of the book of God. Or another translation, the one who recites most the book of God is to lead the people in prayer. Now, in Abi Dawood's version, he adds a small detail to that, and he says, and can recite it better. So وَأَقْدَمُهُمْ قِرَاءَةً. He adds that, and some people translate that as the person who's been reciting for a while. And what does that mean? What does it mean, the one who can recite the Quran the best? There's 2 points over here. وَالْأَقْرَأ يَشْمَلْ مَعْنَيَيْن. So the one who can read it best or recite it best actually consists of 2 meanings, or two interpretations. One is وَيَدُلْ عَلَى ذَلِكَ الأول الأكثر قرآنا. The one who recites the Quran the most is the one who's supposed to lead people in prayer. And the evidence for that is a hadith in Bukhari, in which a slave or a servant, Salim Mawla Abi Hudayfa, would lead everyone in prayer. And this was in a time, mind you, in the Arabian Peninsula, when slaves were the lowest of the low, and they were treated like filth. And to have a slave lead in prayer was actually the way in which people often say that, Islam eradicated slavery completely, and I actually disagree with that. Islam did it incrementally, step by step. And one of the steps was getting a slave to lead everyone else in prayer. It humbled everyone else that when we're talking to God, the slave will be our representative. But why does the slave lead the prayer? أَقْرَأُكُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ. Coincidentally, the slave was the one who knew the Quran the most. He had the most time. He was with the Prophet the most. Another interesting thing, Amr said, a famous Sahaba, Amr said, فَنَظَرُوا فَلَمْ يَكُنْ أَحَدٌ أَكْثَرُ قُرْآنًا مِنِّي فَقَدَّمُونِي بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَنَا إِبْنُ 6 أو 7 سنين. So there is this Sahaba named Amr, and he's a 6-year-old kid. And obviously Islam is new and people are still learning. Not everyone knows the Quran. Some people just became Muslim yesterday. And he said they couldn't find anyone who could recite or who could read properly. And I was a 6-year-old boy and they pushed me forward. Which actually reminds me of a verse. I'm not interpreting the verse, but in Isaiah, and a child will lead them. And it's very interesting how this child was only 6 years old and he did lead them indeed. فهذا دليل صريح على أن الأكثر حفظا للقرآن هو المقدم في الأمامة. So this is actually evidence that a person who knows the most of Quran, it doesn't matter his age, and I would even argue it doesn't matter his or her gender. In light of the most recent Orthodox, I think I read in the news that there was she was an Orthodox lady who recently got promoted in a position that was not suitable for ladies before. So I would even suggest that would be for women as well. And I'm not going to be the first one to promote that. Actually, Jarir al-Tabari promoted this he had his own madhab, which was al-Jariri. And all of the ulama of the Jariri madhab, the school of thought, they actually promoted that even women can lead prayer if they know more Quran than the men that are present. So now that we've went over this, a very interesting thing comes by. And here's actually the fun part. As a khatib, and I'm not a speaker that much, you can probably tell from my lack of, from my poor choice of words and my nervousness. I'm not really a speaker, I'm more of a qari, a reciter of the Quran. But when I do give speeches, and that's not very often, I make sure to accentuate the importance of staying away from arrogance and self-righteousness, and the importance of coming closer to God through humbleness and humility. Now, there was a very interesting question I found on islamqa.com, a very famous Salafi website, and Sheikh Salih al-Munajjid, who I actually met 1 week ago in Masjid al-Raji, a very famous mosque. He's a very nice guy, but he refused to take a photo with me, and I was offended by that. So, Sheikh, the people asked the Sheikh, and this is a very funny comment, and you can just see the self-righteousness and arrogance in this. We have an Imam here in the mosque. This is someone's writing on the internet, they're writing to the Sheikh. He shaves his beard partly. That is, he is not completely clean-shaven, but he keeps a thin beard on his face, and he's a hafiz. Note they also did a totally incorrect transliteration in which they wrote a S instead of a DH, but sorry, I'm a nerd, and so okay. The problem is that there are many people praying behind him who seem to be better to him, who seem to be better than him in following the religion, even though they are not hafiz of Quran. So now we can see the self-righteousness, the arrogance, the judgmental attitude, which is very common, and not only in Islam, but in many religions. The farther right you go, the more you see this. To continue, a question is, does his bid'ah of keeping his beard invalidate his prayers and our prayers? So this guy totally lost sense of God, lost sense of the omnipotent God that we worship as Muslims and as Jews. And he says that this person doesn't have a beard and should he lead prayer. We just went over 5 ahadith all saying that أَقْرَأُكُمْ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ. Not a single one of them mentioned he should look very Muslim-like. So my response to this person, that's a fine-looking high horse. And when I say high horse, I always, these memes come to mind of this horse with, that smokes so many joints that his eyes are turned Indian red. That's how high he is. So that's what arrogance does to you. It makes you look very stupid. So what's interesting is Sheikh Salih al-Manajjir's response, even though he's a Salafi. And I'm looking forward to the lectures that deal with Salafism. I'm really excited to hear them. But even as a Salafi, you can see that he's battling self-righteousness through Salafism. And that's very interesting, and that's very rare. You can never see that normally. The person responds, the fact that his leading prayer is valid is indicated by the fact that the Sahaba prayed behind unjust leaders and rulers. So now he notices that the person who's asking the question is hell-bent on kicking this Imam out and maybe pushing himself forward. He's responding, the people before us, they prayed behind criminals. Now that might sound scary and that might bring a paradox to mind, but the person who leads the prayer is أَقْرَأُكُمْ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ, the one who can recite the Quran the most. Now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about myself. I don't mean to sound like a shallow hipster, desperately trying to be deep, only resulting in embarrassing affectation. But I honestly believe everything happens for a purpose. I was born in Michael Reed's Hospital in Chicago on the snowy winter morning of January 17, 1993. How did I get to Iceland? As a person who was born in Chicago, whose parents are Pakistani immigrants, and I was very interested in, the professor's comments on Pakistan accepting immigrants. I did not know that. But as we learn new things every day. So my parents were actually immigrants from Pakistan who came to the United States. They became American. I was born in Michael Reed's Hospital. And I want to talk about a few coincidences that really shocked me. And this is after I came back from my plane ride, after I came back to Saudi Arabia from Iceland. A very famous chess player named Bobby Fischer. Okay, good. One person knows Bobby Fischer. Good. So I'm not into chess, but I actually found out about him because Bobby Fischer was born in the same hospital as I was born. Obviously when we're young, we always look up our date of birth, who was born on the same day as us, who was born in the same hospital as me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anyone except Bobby Fischer. So for the chess nerds, they would have been really excited, but I'm not very excited about that. But what was very interesting was he was born in Chicago in the same hospital as I was born, and he died in Iceland on my birthday, on January 17. So these are just a whole bunch of coincidences that I find very interesting. He actually had a very important chess game in Reykjavik. It was only, sorry, 1 minute. What was very interesting about Bobby Fischer is he had a very important match in Reykjavik. And at that time period, America and Russia had rough relationships. And this match was a defining moment for him. And he, as an American, he won. And he asserted American authority and American victory over Russian imperialism. And this was in the Cold War era. And what's very interesting is later on, he would not be the only baby from that hospital who would go on to Iceland and become famous. I would be someone who would also go to Iceland but not become famous. Another interesting man I want to mention, also coincidences, on the topic of coincidences, is John Johnson, or Jan Jansoen, as they say. He's a Dutch man, he's a Dutch pirate actually, who converted to Islam. He was captured by the Ottoman Empire. He was a Dutch pirate, but he was captured by the Ottoman Empire. And when he saw the Ottomans, he was interested in Islam, he converted to Islam. And the first impression that the Icelandic people had of Islam was by him, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because he was a pirate, and he did something called the Turkish abductions. They call it Turkish because for the Western world, every time they saw someone who was Muslim, they just called him Turkish. They blanketed the term Turkish on him. So John Johnson was a Muslim, and he was the first Muslim to visit Iceland. His son was Anthony Johnson. And he was the one who founded Brooklyn in New Netherlands, which later on came to be New York. Interesting thing, I lived quite a few years in Brooklyn too. So the thing is, what I'm trying to do with all these coincidences is actually suggest the theory of 6 degrees of separation. How did I get to Iceland? And how did I get to meet our friend, Professor Uriya Shavit? How did I meet him? And how am I standing here today in Tel Aviv, Israel, as a Salafi, somewhat Salafi Muslim who is a Hafiz of Quran? And this is why I want to suggest the 6th degree of separation. What happened was, initially I was an Imam in Mecca. I used to lead prayers, local prayers, everyday prayers, and Ramadan prayers, which are special night prayers. And I realized that I would be very beneficial in a country in which they speak English. Not that my Arabic was bad, I was able to converse in Arabic. But I thought, why not go abroad? Why not have an adventure? I was 20 years old and I was pretty bored. So I said, what country can I visit that would let me have fun, that would let me enjoy, and it would be safe? So ever since I was a kid, I always used to look at a map of the world. I used to love geography, and that's why I actually was interested in Israel too, because it lies right on the Mediterranean. I used to look at a map and I used to wonder, who lives in Iceland? What type of people are they? What languages do they speak? Do they think like me? Do they have their own culture? What are they European-like, or are they American-like? What are they? And so ever since I was a kid, I was interested in Iceland. So I told myself, okay, I'm going to go online. I'm going to search mosques in Greenland and Iceland. Unfortunately, there were no mosques in Greenland, but there was one in Iceland. And the president of that mosque was a Palestinian, very famous Palestinian. So I just sent him an email. And it was basically lucky. I sent him a clip of my audio. I said, I'm available. I can lead prayers. Do you have anyone there? Do you have any Eskimos leading prayers? Who do you have there? So he responded and said, welcome. I said, as long as I have a place to stay and food to eat, I'm okay. I don't need any paycheck or anything. He said, great. So I went over there. And what's interesting is there was always an adventure every day, because I'd wake up in my room, which was right next to the mosque, which Dr. Uriya had the chance to see. And I would just wait for someone to walk in through the door, because obviously it's Iceland. Not many people visit the mosque. Not many people actually. There are more sheep in Iceland than there are humans. The population of sheep is, yes, it's true. So I would wait, and interesting people would walk through that door. Every day there was always someone new. There were always these tourists from Indonesia who were visiting Iceland, and they wanted to pray. So I welcomed them, and they would pray with us. So one day I saw 2 European-looking men enter through the room, and I said, welcome, come inside. And they didn't look Muslim. And obviously I don't like using the term look Muslim, because that's very judgmental, and we already talked about that. But they entered, and I said, have a seat, and they started speaking. And I had just come back from Israel. I was with my friend Inan, and Inan does a lot of peace work between Palestinians and Israelis, and I just came back from that. And so I was sitting, and Dr. Uriya enters with his brother, and he starts introducing himself, and the accent sounds really familiar, but it's very similar to an American accent, but it had a touch, which I couldn't put my hand to. And I came to my mind, maybe Israeli, but I said, no, I'm just being paranoid. So, and I said, how could an Israeli come to Iceland? I mean, so I asked him, are you German? He said, no. And then he said, most people say I'm American. I said, yeah, you do sound very American. And then he introduced himself as Israeli, and I was very proud to meet him. And he asked a lot of questions about how it is to be a Muslim in Iceland. And obviously, I know I have only like 1 minute left, probably. So just briefly, and I know I spoke a lot about أقرأكم بكتاب الله, but the point was that you can have someone much younger than you lead in prayer. And that's what the Icelandic people really loved when I visited them. They saw a young guy who can speak English fluently, who can speak Arabic, but is terrible in Icelandic. And that was okay, because anyone over the age of 10 in Iceland is very fluent in English. They were happy because Icelandic culture is a mix of European culture and American culture. They look up to America a lot like the way the Middle Easterners look up to America and see America as a beautiful country. And at the same time, they also have the Europeanness, the Scandinavian colored roofs, and that beauty. So it's a really beautiful mix of culture. And being a Muslim in Iceland, basically, in short, means understanding how to adjust. Because Iceland is one of, if not the most liberal countries on earth. And Islam is a very conservative religion. So how are you able to adjust to that? And I think Uriya's book is going to be a great way of finding out how you adjust to that. Sharia and Muslim minorities. How do you, as a Muslim living in Iceland, fast when the fast could go up to 23 hours? Do you fast according to Saudi time? Or do you fast 23 hours and hurt yourself and make yourself go through pain? There is a group that does that, and Uriya had the honor to meet them. Apparently, they probably spend that hour eating. I don't know what do they do. They probably spend that whole hour eating, and they sleep probably through the rest of the day. But that's what we call the Khaliji fasting, sleeping during the hours of fasting and staying awake during the eating hours. One last note I'd like to make, and then I'd leave you with that note, is that when people say Saudi Arabia, first of all, why do we say that I'm from Saudi Arabia? I studied Islam in Saudi Arabia. I had a 2 years associate's degree in Arabic, and right now I'm doing my undergrad degree in Islamic Studies from al-Qura University. When people say Saudi Arabia, they imagine the worst things possible. They imagine the most conservative society. They imagine a society that cannot adjust. And the evidence that the knowledge or the way of thinking of the Saudis can adjust, and that gives us hope, is the fact that someone who studied from Saudi Arabia, who studied their version of Islam, their Salafi version of Islam, was able to go to Iceland and feel comfortable in helping people adjust to living as Muslims in Iceland. And a lot of people say a lot of things about Saudi Arabia. I want to take this advantage to say that I've been attending lectures this past 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia, and every single lecture, the sheikh leaves about 10 minutes to talk about ISIS, refuting ISIS. Every single lecture, the sheikh talks about humbleness, and every single lecture, the sheikh talks about ending self-righteousness. The Saudi society has realized that they need to do some changes to improve the image of Islam and to improve the hearts of Muslims, bringing them closer to humbleness, bringing them closer out of that self-righteous arrogance that is found on the far right, and bringing them to the middle. And I'd like to thank all of you for giving me the time, even though I'm a horrible speaker. And I'd like to thank Dr. Uriya and congratulate him on his book, and congratulate him on going so far, all the way to Iceland for knowledge. There's a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لو كان العلم بالثريا لناله مجموعة من هؤلاء أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, that if knowledge was in the star, a certain star called Thuraya in the Arabic culture, a group of people would go just to get that knowledge. And I think that group of people includes Uriya. لو كان, and the hadith also was actually a tafsir or an explanation of the ayah, وَآخَرِينَ مِنْهُمْ لَمَّا يَلْحَقُوا بِهِمْ. A very good news to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which God said, and there are more people who you have not met who will soon become Muslim, and among them were the Persians, and among them were the Romans. Thank you so much. جزاكم الله خيرا. Shalom.
شكرا لك شيخ.